A lot of people don't know what Juneteenth is. Our nation's newest holiday is a celebration of when President Lincoln's orders to free all enslaved people finally made it to Galveston, Texas. It was an effort that took over 2 years. We had the privilege of sitting down with living legend Ms. Opal Lee and hear her thoughts on Juneteenth and freedom at large. After that, we spoke with Mayor Mattie Parker and civil rights icon and journalist Mr. Bob Ray Sanders to discuss what Juneteenth looks like now that it's a national holiday.
We are honored to have Miss Opal Lee here with us at the historic downtown Fort Worth YMCA. Welcome, Miss Opal Lee.
And thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
We are delighted to have you. Today we are going to ask you some questions about Juneteenth, the importance of it, how we celebrate it as a national holiday, but also how we can celebrate it just amongst ourselves and at the YMCA.
And I'm going to tell you that Juneteenth is for everybody. I don't want you to think it's a Texas thing or a black thing. It's freedom for everyone. I want the young people to understand that they can get involved with Juneteenth now.
Yeah.
That we are going to have a walk that 2.5 miles, 2.5 miles. We're going to walk here in Fort Worth, and people will be walking in LA and in Philadelphia and Chicago and other places at the same time. They're going to simulcast it, and I think it's going to be fabulous that people all over the United States and even the world are going to see that now is the time that we celebrate freedom, not for a few, but for everyone.
Yes.
And then there's our Juneteenth. I don't know if it's going to last that long, but I'm advocating that we celebrate Juneteenth from the 19th of June to the 4th of July. And that's going to be wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Juneteenth has not always been celebrated as a national holiday, but we know that specifically in Texas, because there is such a rich history here connected to Juneteenth, that it has been celebrated. So do you have a particular memory that's your favorite from celebrating Juneteenth growing up?
Oh, but I do. You see, Mrs. Waller started the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society because she'd been asked to gather all the materials that blacks had contributed to the growth of Fort Worth. Mm-hmm. She couldn't find anything written. So that's why she started the Historical Society. And I was one of its members. Juneteenth was one of its programs. And the newspaper says that there was a Juneteenth in Little Sycamore Park, 30,000 people in a 3-day period, 10,000 people a day. Did we have fun? So we knew when a plug was pulled, and it was time for us all to go home at 10 o'clock at night. This time, I got on a flatbed truck and put that plug back in, and we partied till dawn.
That is an awesome memory. I would have loved to have been there.
We had fun. We did.
So what sparked or fueled this idea for you to go about getting Juneteenth to become a national holiday?
I tell you, I was 89, 90 years old, and I thought about the fact that I'd raised 4 children. I'd gone to colleges and universities. I taught school. I taught 8-year-olds, third grade, so long I was beginning to act like them. I got the feeling that there was something more I should do. And I remembered Dr. Myers, Ronald Myers, who was a medical doctor, a minister, and a jazz musician all rolled into one.
Wow.
And Dr. Myers was adamant about Juneteenth being a national holiday. And perhaps he's looking down now and saying, it's about time you got it done. So I decided that if a little old lady in tennis shoes walked from Texas to D.C., somebody would take notice. It's 1,400 miles. And so I gathered some friends, and they gave me a send-off from my church, Baker Chapel, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I walked 2.5 miles. And then, when I got up the next day, I started where I left off, and I walked another 2.5 miles. I walked from Fort Worth to Arlington, Grand Prairie, Dallas, Box Springs, Joplin. I tell you, everybody was so nice. And so I continued walking Shreveport, Texarkana, Little Rock, St. Louis. And if I left Fort Worth September 2016, I actually got to Washington walking that way January 2017.
Wow.
Now, we had asked President Obama to walk with us from the Frederick Douglass House to the Capitol. He was in Chicago. I didn't get what I wanted. But guess what? P. Diddy helped me get 1,500,000 signatures that we took to Congress. And we were prepared to take that many more when we got the call to go to the White House because President Biden was going to sign that Juneteenth bill into law. I could have done a holy dance. But my kids say when I try, I'm twerking. So I didn't. Oh, it was fabulous.
It sounds amazing. So, what is one piece of advice you would give to people who are wanting to participate in freedom work, the work of confronting injustice, inequality?
I tell them to make themselves a committee of one. To change somebody's mind. We know people who aren't on the same page we are on. Change their minds. Not gonna happen in a day, you have to work at it. But if people can be taught to hate, they can be taught to love. And this is going to change the way things are done now. And our country needs changing. And we can do it. And we don't have guns, but we got sharp minds. And the young folk can turn this country around.
Now, I'm a part of the Gen Z generation, so I feel like you're speaking specifically to me, and I definitely will take up that mantle.
Oh,
that's
right.
awesome. So here at the YMCA, our mission is putting Christian principles into practice through programs that build healthy body, mind, and spirit. We also believe in youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. Or like I like to say, we like to address the issues that lower the quality of living for people, poverty, homelessness, things of that nature. So what is your take on this?
Well, what we're doing, and you need to know that we had a food bank that burned, And there was this huge facility behind my house.
Wow.
And it was up for sale for $1.3. It was $1,300,000. And I had nerve enough to ask for it. And they leased it to our little group for $4,000 a month. And I nearly had a hemorrhage. Where we getting it $4,000? But we paid it for 11 months. And the month we didn't have the money, those people came to us and said, "You're doing a good job in this neighborhood, feeding 500 families a day." And they gave us that facility, $1.3 million. I tell you. So, we have been able to share with the WIC program. Wow. We've been able to share. We take food to market, and it has been marvelous. We've got this program now. I polled people who were standing in line at the food bank, and 66 of them said they'd like to farm. So I asked for, and the Trinity River Authority gave us the use of 13 acres of land, and we are growing all kinds of food. You're talking about a food desert. We are doing something about a food desert. And so we've got a program in asking people if they wanted to farm. And 66 said they wanted to. We chose to work with people who had been incarcerated and couldn't find a job. If they learned farming, and Tarleton State's willing to give them accreditation, wow. And the time they've spent was not time lost, because in Texas, you work on a farm if you're in prison. So they get accreditation when they go through the program, and we're just delighted to have that going. We are.
Ooh, that touches my heart in a very real way. So I want to ask more personalized questions to you, because I imagine that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but getting Juneteenth to be a national holiday was that mountaintop moment. But I imagine it didn't start there. So was there any significant events that happened throughout your life, growing up, childhood, that fueled you to want to do this work?
I'm not sure that what happened to me and my family when I was about 9, 10, my parents had worked extremely hard, and they bought a home. 948 East Annie Street on the south side of Fort Worth, and my mom had it fixed up so nice.
Wow.
But on the 19th of June, people started gathering. The police were there, and the paper says that the police couldn't control the mob. When my dad came home with a gun, the police told him, "If you bust a cap, we'll let this mob have you." Our parents sent us to friends several blocks away, and they left under cover of darkness. Those people drug the furniture out, they burned stuff, they did despicable things. But our parents never, ever discussed it with us. Never, ever. I'm not sure if that's where my passion for Juneteenth came from, because it was on the 19th of June that this happened. But I do know that I believe firmly that if we work together, we will accomplish so much more than what we are accomplishing now. And I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I won't keep on walking and talking, and somebody's going to hear me.
You're being heard by the tens of thousands, by the millions. That's awesome. I often tell people that not always when you confront or you experience racism, injustice, inequality. I know for me, it wasn't something that just sparked this idea, let's just go make change. It was disheartening.
Yeah.
And it's not every time that you experience these things and it fuels you to action. So I admire you. I applaud you for allowing it to do so.
But see, I'm everybody's grandma. And when grandmas tell you something, she means for you to follow through. And I believe that the young people will follow through and things are going to change. I look forward to it.
I look forward to it too. And last question. So, where do you get this, I call it unshakable courage?
Have I not told you about my grandparents? No. I spent summers with my grandparents. He was short, stocky, little legs stuck out like that on a stand. He'd send somebody up there to her and say, help them get on their feet. So I think it's in my DNA that you just gotta help others more than as much as you do your family. And so, here I go. Any chance I get, I help. Because I can. And I think everybody else, if they can, ought to be about the helping their brother.
Yeah.
We have it in the Bible. We are our brother's keeper. So we need to be about it'll make a bigger, stronger world and would make these United States the best country that others would emulate, you know? I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. You give us so much to think about. You've even widened my own scope on what Juneteenth can mean for all of us.
Freedom.
Yep.
Yes.
And freedom takes on so many different forms. So I thank you for that. Thank you for your time. We thank you for your work, your efforts, your legacy. And in me being a part of Gen Z, I will find many ways to continue your legacy.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Mayor Parker, Mr. Bob Ray Sanders, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
So I want to first, right out of the block, talk about race in this conversation, and sort of acknowledge that I'm a white man, Mayor Parker, a white woman, Mr. Sanders, a black man. And hearing what Ms. Lee had to say about Juneteenth being a celebration for all people, for those of us from outside the black experience, what is a way that we can celebrate and participate in this important national holiday?
Well, if you want to go first.
Well, first of all, I mean, and Ms. Opal is correct in saying that freedom of any people should be celebrated by all, no matter where you are. I mean, whether you're in South Africa or in the Middle East, wherever you are in South America, when a people becomes free, the world should celebrate. And that's how many of us saw Juneteenth, as a day of celebration, and with the understanding, as Ms. Opal, I'm sure said, is that American history is black history. Black history is American history. So all of our histories come together, and we should celebrate those histories collectively. And you don't have to discriminate in order to celebrate history. So yes, and I can remember in the early days, when Juneteenth was really celebrated here, the department stores had ads in their windows, the newspapers had ads, and then it waned for a while until Miss Opal Lee came along in the early 70s and, reinvigorated the idea of celebrating Juneteenth. And suddenly we got a lot of other people coming back, white people feeling free that they could do it as well. That's a step forward, but we're still a long way from where I want to see it.
I think, well, first of all, well put by Bob Ray, but it is a celebration of freedom for all people. To me, it also is a reflection on how, as Americans, we should continually be striving for the concept of a more perfect union. That will never be perfect. We have a long way to go, but I'm always reminded, especially on Juneteenth, as you're walking with Miss Opal, the power in what progress can mean and what people like Miss Opal really mean to this country in creating that sense of freedom and belonging. And I do hope, just like Bob Ray, that to get to a place where Juneteenth is synonymous with July 4th, right? That is this opportunity for the entire country to celebrate true American progress to making sure that all people are free and what that journey looks like. So it's been a learning experience for me. If you think about when I was elected as mayor, this was right at the pinnacle of when this was nominated as a national holiday by President Biden. And Miss Opal finally achieved what she'd been fighting so long to get to. So,
And what you also have to understand, too, is that there was a time here in America, and particularly in Texas, where Black people celebrated Juneteenth more than they did July 4th. Because for many of their years, July 4th didn't mean independence for them. They were still under Jim Crow. They were still being denied seating at the restaurants in downtown Fort Worth, denied admittance to the movie theaters on 7th Street. They were still riding on the back of the bus and drinking from water fountains marked colored in the courthouse. I actually drank from colored water fountains in the courthouse. That's what got me interested in criminal justice, wondering, what's going on in the courtroom if this is happening in the hallways of the courthouse. So Juneteenth had more meaning back in those days than July 4th. And I think Ms. Opal is correct in saying that there ought to be a way that we connect those two holidays and where they basically mean the same.
yeah. And you think about, how do you break through to an everyday American, especially around Juneteenth? And we're lucky here in Fort Worth because there's been so much conversation around Juneteenth because of Miss Opal. But I talked to colleagues, other mayors in other cities, large cities in the United States, that don't have the same type of appreciation and gathering point around Juneteenth. And I think, to Bob Ray's point, if you could somehow link the Juneteenth to July 4th, the everyday American will recognize freedom is best for all people, regardless of color or origin or country, really. So
yeah, Ms. Opal Lee spoke a lot about Fort Worth specifically, and I know as you are from just down the road here and a little further down the road, and I consider myself a Fort Worthian. She spoke about personal tragedy, but she also spoke a lot about her hope for our community. Bob Ray, I was wondering, for somebody who's new to Fort Worth, what are some moments from Black history that you think are unique to Fort Worth that would help to sort of contextualize where we are on the Juneteenth journey in Fort Worth?
Well, first of all, you got to understand that I was born here. And unlike most people, I was actually born in downtown Fort Worth in an all-Black hospital. At the time that I was born, there were the two major hospitals that took Black patients. John Peter Smith, where it was then City County Hospital at the time, and St. Joseph, the Catholic Hospital. But both of those hospitals had their colored wards in the basement. So most of the people born at the time that I was born who were Black were born in the basement of a hospital. I was born at Ethel Ransom Memorial Hospital, run by one of the most famous Black surgeons in the country, which is right downtown Fort Worth. So from birth, we came along in a world that was denying us any privileges at all that meant anything to us. Going to colored schools, we were denied entrance to Forest Park. Now, my family goes back almost 160 years here, so I know it well. They were landowners, so they paid taxes. But even though, 100 years later, after I came along, I could still not sit on the front seat of a bus. I still could only go to Forest Park one day out of the year. We could swim in the swimming pool one day. That day, by the way, was Juneteenth. That's the uniqueness of Fort Worth. Now, keep in mind that on June 20th, they drained the pool. so that when white kids came back on June 21st, they didn't have to swim in water that black kids had been in the day before. That was Fort Worth. In my office at the Black Chamber of Commerce right now, I have a photo of Lyndon Johnson signing the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. That's important to me for a lot of reasons. And as I got to know Lyndon Johnson, but the day after that bill was signed, I came downtown to the Hollywood Theater to integrate it alone. And I did. And I still thank God for the young girl who was in the booth who sold me the ticket and didn't call the police. That's Juneteenth Fort Worth to me. And of course, Miss Opal, who rejuvenated the whole idea in the early 70s.
Juneteenth is a real acknowledgement of inequality in our society, and we've looked at it a little bit on the historical lens, but we still have, inequality still persists today. And Mattie, I would look to you to what do you think about Fort Worth's potential in moving forward and bridging the gap and inequality that exists in our communities right now?
I think sometimes, this isn't at least my experience as governing, is when you talk about inequality as this massive problem, it's very difficult for people to understand or feel like they have a place and solution, right? And how to move a community forward, a neighborhood forward. But when you talk about inequalities or unfairness, or where people don't have a fair shot at life in categories, whether it's in education, in neighborhood development, in healthcare, criminal justice, that feels more tangible to the individual person. And oftentimes when I'm speaking with constituents or residents here in Fort Worth, then they'll kind of break down the barrier. I'm like, oh, well, now I can give you an example of how I feel about my community, or how I have felt like there was an unequal opportunity for me and my family and my children. And whether it's the correct course of action or not, I have personally chosen, both as mayor and in my professional career before this for the last 15, is really to focus on education and the great equalizer that it is, and how far we still have to go. And there's a lot that cities can do, and we are doing a lot of that in Fort Worth. We're imperfect, but I think we're moving in the right direction. The last thing I'll say is, and I don't have a solution to this, how do you get the everyday person out of their bubble, especially if they're living a pretty good life, right? They're living in a life that is removed from that sense of inequality or understanding, other than maybe the volunteer day here or there, the charitable donation that they make. And I think Fort Worth, back to this concept of Juneteenth, that's the real power to me in bringing all community together on a day like Juneteenth, to remind ourselves that a lot of people spent their entire lives, including Miss Opal, to strive towards freedom and fighting for equality for all. And we have a responsibility as a community to not mess it up, to carry the torch forward for people like Miss Opal.
Just adding on to the whole idea of education, keep in mind, I went to segregated schools all my childhood, until I graduated from high school. My first integrated education situation was when I entered North Texas State University to major in journalism at a time when no black people were being hired to work in journalism. My father thought I was crazy. And my mother sort of did too, but she was more kind.
What did they want you to do?
The thing was, you go and you major to become a teacher in some ways. And even in those days when I majored in journalism, I still got a teaching certificate. I became the first black person to do student teaching in the Burville Independent School District because they didn't have any other place to send me. And I went to a place that they had never seen black people based before. And that's right in Richland Hills. But the beauty of the I Am Terrell experience, I Am Terrell, which is now a great STEM and visual and performing arts school, and they closed it, but it was the original black school in Fort Worth. And at one time, not just for Fort Worth, but 17 other cities. All of these places were sending kids to I Am Terrell High School, and we had some of the best educators in the world who knew that they were preparing us for the change that they knew was going to come.
Coming, yeah.
And that's what they were setting us up for. Okay, you got to get change. I will never forget that, and you'll be surprised when I mention the name of this author, but there was a teacher, English teacher, 10th grade English teacher for me, who knew that I wanted to be a writer. And she said, hey, here's a book that you need to know this author, because if you want to be a writer, you got to know him. Now keep in mind, this author was not supposed to be taught in the Fort Worth public schools at the time. But I got that book, and that very night, my eyes were open, because the author was Langston Hughes. The book was his book, The Dream Keepers, which I still have a copy of today in my home library. But the one poem that taught me that with all the discrimination against me, with all the put downs, with the Jim Crow laws and all of that, Langston just graduated from college, on his way down to visit his father in Mexico, his estranged father, crossing the Mississippi River, wrote down, some people say on a napkin or something, that may be a myth, the Negro speaks of rivers, in which he says, I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I pitched my hut near the Congo that lulled me to sleep. I heard the singing on the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans and saw his muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. You see, I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. In the 10th grade, I realized that I had a destiny that was far beyond what many people thought, because Langston told me that I had bathed in the Euphrates, not yesterday or the day before, but when dawns were young. That's what education can do when the right teacher gets in the mind of the right student to help change them forever.
I gotta take a minute.
That's good, right?
That's good. We talked about the role of education. Let's talk about other institutions that and how they can support celebrating Juneteenth. What is the role in private businesses, government, nonprofits like ours? How do we learn to celebrate and honor Juneteenth better?
Well, I think let's take businesses and private corporations. I think there are examples of some businesses that do an excellent job, and others that are pretty far removed. And that's just something we have to continue to prioritize. And, obviously Bob Ray serves on the staff for our Metropolitan Black Chamber of Commerce, but you also have the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce that participates, the Ford Chamber of Commerce. This is the conduit for business, but again, a long way to go. I think for government, the city of Fort Worth, just in a short period of time since I've been mayor, and even when I was on staff, we've stumbled our way into it. And now I feel like it's catching on. For the first time this year, city staff created a Juneteenth t-shirt. Right? That may be small, but that is something that multiple employees across our organization of over 7,000 people are prioritizing to be proud of. And the walk that will happen, on Juneteenth, which is incredibly exciting. And I think we've made a lot of focus and inroads, which is good. The one thing I wish, it's just a date, is I wish schools were in session, because you can get students out there through their families, but because they're out of school, in a perfect world, I thought, what if you could get every single school in Fort Worth, there are 12 school districts, by the way, to bring 10 students to the march. And I mentioned this recently, I was like, we could still do that for next year. So at the end of the school year, tell the schools, you nominate 10 students and their families bring them, so that you have a true reflection of the rainbow of Fort Worth to participate. Because this next generation has to believe in the power of celebrating Juneteenth so that it doesn't go away, right?
I would agree with that. I would also say it takes leadership, and I would include this mayor as one who's been doing that. Now, keep in mind that she's the youngest mayor we've ever had. So having that young energy come forth, talking about things as a lot of us old people have been talking about for years, that sets a pace for us to get on board. This organization, the Y, when I think about my childhood, the McDonald YMCA was one of the places that we could go to. Again, it was, quote, segregated.
Right.
But the Y saw a place that it should play a role in our community. There it was, United Methodist Church, Bethlehem Center over on the south side. I was there almost every Saturday. the Methodist Church, which was segregated. I mean, there's a reason we have a Southern Methodist and a Southern Baptist, because there were people who just didn't believe in that kind of thing. But we always had some leaders in Fort Worth, and I got to give this to, even Marvin Leonard, who had Leonard Brothers Department Store, and Mr. Monig, who had the Monig Department Stores, who at one point decided, hey, you know what? It's stupid to have this kind of craziness of segregating people at the lunch counter. Let's integrate it. I mean, they weren't forced to it. There were no demonstrations, as I recall. But we have institutions. The one thing that I worry about, frankly, is government. Because what's happening now is in our legislatures, in city councils, at school boards, we're going backward. We're talking division. We're not talking about uniting anymore. We're talking about people saying we don't want diversity and inclusion anymore. I'm talking all the way up to the highest levels of state and national government. That's where we are. So I'm frightened until we get some real leaders who will stand up. I feel that practically everything I've fought for over the last 40 years.
Here's a note of encouragement. I wasn't there that day, but I got a call. So Miss Opal went to the state capitol twice this year.
Yeah.
And you saw grown men and women of both parties just fall apart about Miss Opal. And that's what is so powerful. And thank you for videoing and telling her story, because anybody that meets her is forever changed. I feel so fortunate that I have been around her as much as I have been. I have moments just like you, Bob Ray, of complete fear and confusion about how we're moving forward. But at the same time, you got to go with what works. And sometimes, because we're Miss Opals, we'll travel the country and we use her, and she's got more energy than any of us in this room.
Got that right.
And it's powerful for her to tell her story.
And the beauty of her story is, and I think I'm the last of 11 children, but the beauty, and I'd say that only to say that, had my family alone taught hatred, we could have upended Fort Worth alone. I mean, my family alone could have done that. The beauty of Miss Opal's story is that with all that she's gone through, with her house being burned down when she was a child, on June 19th, by the way, that she can come up and when she speaks, she does not speak of hatred. She speaks of love. She talks about uniting. That's the story that has to be told, and more people have to tell that story. And as I was saying earlier, the sad part for me is that a lot of people are not telling that story anymore.
Yeah.
Let's look optimistically to the future and talk to me about how you think that Juneteenth might be able to evolve and adapt to an ever-changing Fort Worth.
Yeah. So first of all, the amazing efforts by Miss Opal, her family, Jared Howard, and others to build a National Juneteenth Museum here in Fort Worth is hard work, but we will get there. I have full confidence in that. And I know that just pause and think about what that significance would mean. Not just for the whole country, but for our community to be home to a place where people travel from all over the world to understand what Juneteenth means here in Fort Worth, right? So that would be one project, I think, in particular. In addition, there's also a tremendous amount of work being led to create an African American history museum in Fort Worth, because we're focused today in this conversation on Juneteenth, and we should, but as Bob Ray said at the beginning of the conversation, Black history is American history. Black history is Fort Worth history. And to truly learn from past mistakes and horrors in Fort Worth or any other city, you have to memorialize it. You have to talk about it, and you have to present it in a way that people can have a learning experience. And both of those particular projects are incredibly encouraging to me. And what's really great is our other wonderful cultural institutions in the cultural districts, including all of your major museums, in particular the Amon Carter, are also leaning into this opportunity to lift up Black history. And again, what I said originally, it's a learning for me too. I often am reminded of what just the education I'm getting on the world and on progress and history in our society by being in this seat. And you can't rush. Some people you're never going to get. You just won't. Exactly. But I still maintain that 80% of Americans are somewhere right here in the middle. They're not on the fringes. They're not the one yelling on Twitter or TikTok. And they are hungry to come together and to compromise and build consensus and work together. And this, in particular, conversation around Juneteenth, to me, is a great convening point of, can we all just agree freedom is wonderful and what progress we've made as a country? And I'm inspired by that for sure.
Yeah, and I would simply add that, and this is something I say all the time to young people and old people as well, history needs to be told. It needs to be told well, and it needs to be told fully. And it may be up to us. If we start taking the history out of our public schools, if I start deciding for you who you can decide is a hero or not, that's not teaching history. You tell it all, and you tell it well. So it may end up being that we tell our children, and frankly, a lot of us haven't done that well enough. If they're not going to get it in the public schools, and at the rate we're going, I mean, if my child is not going to get it in school, it's up to me to teach them. So we've got to keep passing this on. And I every chance I get, I'm talking history. I'm talking about the past and where I hope our future is going to be, even though I have doubts. I mean, I'm more discouraged than I've been in a while.
Well, I just want to open the floor for anything else you feel like we didn't cover, or any opportunities coming up that folks should be aware of.
Yeah. Please bring your families to the Juneteenth walk with Miss Opal, and be humbled because she's not going to stop walking, and you're going to be hot. It's going to be 110 degrees. But I think it's an awesome opportunity to walk with community. Those are the things I would mention. And then let's think creatively in future years on how to better involve more people and more communities. And again, to Bob Ray's point, thank you to the YMCA for believing in this and putting this conversation forward. Paul, great job.
I'll just say amen to that. I'll add one other thing. I mean, we do have institutions, as the mayor suggested, including its city. But I've been working with TCU, which has an incredible project going on now, where they're re-examining their own history and telling their story, the good and the bad, the ugly. And they're involved. They got a new diversity department out there that's really working. Even though there are people trying to do away with diversity, there are some people, institutions like TCU and some businesses who are sticking with it. So I think it's part of our job to make sure that those institutions that we care about follow that same kind of outline of telling their story and all of our stories at the same time.
Thank you.
Mayor Mattie Parker, Mr. Bob Ray Sanders, thank you so much for your time. Happy Juneteenth.
Yes, happy Juneteenth.
Happy
Thank you very
Juneteenth.
much.